Kansas City to New York City, from planet Earth to extraterrestrial life in space, a podcast with no equal, engaged in unconventional warfare through your speakers and headphones. This is a show about embracing the suck, conquering your demons, and finding God in the face of adversity. Chris Tonto Peranto.
Switch is on. Motherfucker, I'm gonna shoot you in the face.
Ian Scotto.
You know, Ian and I have been dating for a long time.
You are now tuned into the Battle Line Podcast.
The switch is on. Yes, that is that famous intro of ours, and I don't get to say it often enough. That is, in fact, Alex Jones at the very top of the show saying, "I've been dating Ian, or Ian and I have been dating for a long time." Yeah, if you guys don't know, especially if you're a new listener, we did have Alex Jones on one of the very first episodes ever. And it was a blast, man. I will always be unapologetic that I'm a fan of Alex. I think he's a fun interview. And I'd truly love to have him back on. And the only thing that stops me from reaching out at times is the craziness of the censorship going on. It's not even what Alex is going to say. I feel like just having Alex on, they'll like revoke your YouTube or some crap like that. Or, or take us off Apple Podcasts. I mean, some of that stuff has slowed down a little bit, especially with Alex being reinstated on X or Twitter with Elon Musk at the helm. But yeah, I do always think about that stuff. You can let me know your comments at Ian Scotto on X, because I think it'd be fun to have him back on. And that's really that's a Chris connection right there. But anyway, you guys see the title. I am personally gearing up for SHOT Show as you're hearing this, and we've done, I don't know how many consecutive new episodes, so give us a break, because this is actually a really cool best of that I wanted to highlight with some of the really awesome pilots we've had on. Before we get to all that, I have to say, man, the feedback on the last episode with Edsel Dope, Tony Campos, has been tremendous, picked up by We Are the Pit, Blabbermouth, and a million other rock sites. It's always cool when we make news like that and get new listeners on board. So if you are a new listener, we usually highlight special operations veterans, contractors, sometimes even first responders, police officers, and that type of thing. But I occasionally do like to have bands on, or even actors on, or people from other realms of life, athletes and that type of thing. But we've done a lot of bands because that's kind of my wheelhouse. That's what I'm into. And usually, more times than not, there is some type of military connection with them in, fans listening to them who are veterans, or even stories they have of friends who have served and that type of thing. So anyway, with that, another thing I was going to address is some plans for the coming months. I've said this a few times on recent episodes, that if you've been listening, I am no fan of Zoom, and that's how we have to do the majority of our episodes, with Chris being in Kansas and myself being in New York. I love when we get to do an episode in studio, like the recent one with Kirk Spradley. And we were for a while doing things on Squadcast, and then our video with John Keys completely didn't record, even though it looked perfectly fine. Luckily, the audio captured, but after that, I was like, I don't care if this is high res, we can't lose material. So I deactivated that account because I was in touch with them. There was no backup. I was actually talking to friend of the show and pilot, John Rain Waters, and some other people who use Riverside, and they've had great experience. So the plan is, for early this year, we will hop over to Riverside, where episodes will record in high resolution and high quality audio. And if someone's connection just is not great that day, then we'll hop over to Zoom as a backup. And I'd also like to do at least 1 or 2 episodes every month in studio, because in studio is the best. It can't be replicated. I wish I could get Chris to come out here, but it's just not in the cards, it looks like. But so many people come into New York the way the Kirk did. So, yeah, we're going to try to do more in studio at Gotham Podcast Studios when we can. with that, this episode is really pilots that we've had on talking combat stories, or in the case of Ashlee Leppert, mission stories, because she's not a combat veteran, but she did certainly take part in a major mission with Hurricane Harvey that got her recognized at the White House, and she became Air Medal recipient for that. But yeah, some of the episodes we've had on with pilots, we actually didn't get into any combat stories with them, like John Rain Waters. I listened back. I don't think we have many combat stories with him, or Kirk Spradley. We mainly focused on other combat, but not really pilot stories, which is what I wanted to get into for this episode. And also, I sometimes forget, some of the pilots that we've had on are not necessarily combat veterans if they served in the 90s. Many of them have not seen combat. So yeah, that's mainly what this episode is. So hitting it off right now for that, we got Ryan Fugit, Apache pilot and CIA officer. This is from episode 140. Ryan also hosts his own podcast that you got to check out, Combat Story. Tonto's been featured on there. So yeah, this is Ryan.
I've been a pilot for about 6 years. And so I was a company commander responsible for 40 people. We had 8 to 10 helicopters to patrol a pretty large area. Like the focus in 2008 when I was there was in Iraq with the surge. So a lot of the assets went there. So we were trying to cover a really broad part of Afghanistan and support a lot of guys on the ground with not a whole lot of assets. So we were spread thin, which means we got to see a lot of action as a result. A few that come to mind, we were on, and actually I know, we were chatting before, Jack Murphy, obviously.
Yeah, I worked with Jack for so many years, so yeah.
Great guy, as you know, like I've interviewed him and Dave, love them, and their show, Team House, and they've had me on as well. Jack and I, when we were talking, I told him I was based at Salerno in Khost in Afghanistan, and he's like, were you there when the base got attacked? And so I was. There were multiple times it was attacked, but one of the times was when I was there, and I just happened to be on our quick reaction that night. So if anything happened in our whole AO, like even 3 hours away, that was on us to run out, get in our aircraft and fly out and do something. And that night we were on a night cycle. So, you wake up really late in the afternoon, might work out for a little bit, and we go out and we pre-flight our aircraft. So we make sure everything's set. We do a handover from the previous team. If there's anything going on, nothing's happening. So because we're pilots, we like to eat. We go down to the chow hall and we're sitting there and we get this call, like we're eating midnight chow, they called it. So it's like eggs and meat and stuff in our faces. And then they call us, hey, the base is getting attacked. We need you guys to launch. And the chow hall was not near the airfield. So you got like these 4 not in the greatest shape pilots trying to run out to the aircraft. There's stuff like going off outside the wire. You're starting to hear explosions and small arms fire. We don't know what's going on. All we heard over our radio was, hey, base is under attack, which is pretty rare. We weren't a huge base, but we were big. So for somebody to come and hit us was not a frequent occurrence. So we were running out. We're heading out to the aircraft, and we got our crew chiefs who are helping to launch us, basically. And in an Apache, unlike a Black Hawk or a Chinook, the crew chiefs don't go with us. They're just hooking up. We're talking to them on the radio as we're getting cranked, and they're making sure everything looks good so we can take off. And as we're getting into the cockpit with our crew chiefs, we got small arms fire like coming in over the wire. You can start seeing tracers, some explosions going off. And we kind of, as pilots, tuck into our kind of nice little safe cockpit area. And our crew chiefs are out on the wing, like checking stuff for us and making sure we're ready to launch, like really exposed. So it was one of the few times that I got to sit there and like see them put themselves out on the line for me. Because usually we would take off and we'd fly an hour and we'd get in a fight and come back. And this time, like they were really, it made a big difference to me. Like they put themselves out there for me that night. So we get in, we crank, we take off, and usually we're flying out for some time. And here, like we took off into just a very chaotic environment. So FOB Salerno, for anybody who's been downrange, they'll know like, oh, in Khost, there's this base Salerno, And then not too far away was this base Chapman, which unfortunately a year after I left, Chapman was hit with a really nasty suicide bomber that's featured in Zero Dark 30. It was a CIA NX base that got hit. And so you had a lot of the OGA folks, other government agencies, special ops at that base. So when they heard we were getting hit, they're like, oh yeah, that's in our backyard. So they're rolling out of their base. The artillery battalion that was our perimeter defense is also like, okay, we're going to go get in this. So we got all these friendlies converging outside at night. And there isn't anything like drawn up, like we're doing a deliberate operation where we knew, all right, we're going at this house. Here's what the bad guys will look like. It was just really chaotic, all kinds of comms going off. So it's two Apaches. We take off and we literally, we're just looking straight down at our base, trying to orient on where the fight is. You can't really talk to anybody. The friendlies coming in from Chapman, we don't know their comms because we never work with them. They're all spooky special ops people. So we see them coming. We can't really tell them from the other friendlies or enemy. So we're just trying to assess the situation. And within an Apache, outside of the special ops community for aviation, it's the most technically advanced aircraft. So what we would do between the two aircraft to make sure we don't run into each other is we would drop this icon on our computer screens. So like my wingman would drop it on top of the area we're working on his dash, and then text it over to me. So we had the same overlay. And it was basically a box that was cut in half. And so we'd say, all right, you guys, you aircraft, stay on that side of the box, and the other aircraft will stay on the other so we don't run into each other. So we're doing that, and we're kind of doing racetrack patterns separately, not like a trail wingman scenario. And we're just trying to orient on what's going on the ground. And in this particular event, I was sitting in the back seat of the Apache. I would usually sit in the front as the commanding officer to run the battle. The guy in the back is typically the one who's flying, and the guy in front is shooting and kind of making sure that what's going on the ground makes sense and that we're helping how we need to be helping. So this time, to get me some time in the back seat, we switched, which is not a good thing to do in combat. I was not as familiar with the back seat. So I'm trying to orient and not run into my wingman. And all of a sudden, my front seater, who's the most experienced pilot in our unit, is like, all right, I got some enemy here. We're cleared to take a shot. Make sure I'm clear. So I said, okay, sounds good. I get into an attack pattern. We come in to shoot, and I'm like, all right, you're clear, because it's my responsibility to clear him. And then all of a sudden, our wingman flies like right in front of us on the screen, not like 10 meters in front of us, but between us and the target. And so on the screen that my front seater is using to look at his target, he's basically got another Apache that flies in front.
Wow.
So to me, that was a huge like wake up moment of, God, I cannot be behind this aircraft. Like I got to get ahead of the fight. So what I did is I pulled up, we aborted that shot, we pulled up and started climbing to get back into a position. And I was like, I just need a couple seconds to my front seater. And he was really experienced. He's like, all right, no problem. And then, all right, let's get back in this fight. And so we did. We got back in. We ended up not taking many shots that night because it was so chaotic on the ground. But we were able to push these guys back. The fight went out. Like we flew for probably 4 or 5 hours that night. And then we handed over to a day crew of Kiowas to take over. Like this fight went on. They hit us with a pretty serious vehicle-borne IED. So took out a lot of the perimeter, some of the perimeter guards, the Afghans. They did not actually breach our base, which is great. But it was intense. Like I just hadn't really been involved in something that was that, so chaotic like that. We got into some others later, but nothing like in my backyard like this. So it gave me a great appreciation for what these guys in these isolated FOBs were going through when they got hit. And it was just a reminder, I got to be on my game at all times when I'm up here. Like I can't just say we're clear if I haven't really looked hard enough to clear it. And then it was great because the guy in the front seat could have really wrecked me. I mean, I was a senior ranking officer, but he had been flying for 20 years. And he's like, hey, just calm down. We'll get back in this. And we did. And he helped me. So great learning experience, but not the kind that I really wanted to be a part of like that. But we ended up helping the base. That felt good. And I got to see my guys really, the crew chiefs got into it for one of the first times, which I thought was awesome.
Well, when you said earlier, when I asked you, these experiences that change you as a person, how did that change you as a person? Saying that you were no longer the same person you were before deployment from that experience.
Yeah, I mean, like that was truly near death. If we had hit our wingman, all of us would have been dead. I would have taken 3 other people's lives with me. It wasn't the first time I had, I guess, like thought about a near-death experience, but it was probably the first time I was that close to one, like really that close to it. And that would have been a catastrophe, not just for us who lost our lives, but like having the PR for the Taliban would have been great on that one. Like that's what they want to see. Aircraft go down, the whole dynamic of the battle changes. So I think it made me remember, hey, I might feel young at 28, but this is the real deal here. And actually, when I was in my first assignment in Germany years before that, in 2005, 2006, we were on a training exercise, and two pilots that I knew just flew straight into the ground on a training exercise. And like, these are people we knew from our unit. And so that was like the first time that it was real to me. You could really get killed doing this. These were experienced pilots on a training run at night and got fixated on a target and just flew straight into the ground and couldn't pull up. And then you sit there in the aviation community, you listen to the tapes of the people, like the black box recorders of what happened in their last moments. And like you're listening to the last minute of their lives with all the other pilots to learn from it. But it's hard to divorce yourself from like the emotions of these guys and their families, their kids, their wives. Super hard. So like, I guess I say that night when we got that base attack, it wasn't like the first time I had to confront like mentally the possibility we would die, because it really started with that moment in Germany, but it kept building towards changing me and my mindset and not taking things for granted, writing back home a little more often, that sort of thing.
Who was the first person you got to call to recall that near-death experience to? Like your parents,
Yeah, great question. So I was married and had a 6-month-old son at the time.
Wow.
So that was tough.
All right, this next one is from Brian Slade, Apache pilot and author. If you want to check out that full episode, it's episode 187. Great number. This is Brian Slade.
My very first engagement was when I went and deployed, I only had 300 hours as a pilot. So wow. I was low time guy, but I was next on the chopping block to be an aircraft commander, and we were short aircraft commanders. So needs of the Army, surprise, you're going to be a low time aircraft commander. So they were upgrading me while I was downrange, but my first engagement with the Taliban was actually as a co-pilot in the front seat. And I had a very experienced guy in the back seat, and I'm very grateful for it. And you'll find out why in a minute. So as we roll around the corner, there's this cliff, and it's probably a 300-foot cliff on each side, and there's a big, I would call it a canyon. It's a valley, but it was basically a canyon in between these two. And there was a convoy that had taken an IED, and they were basically being ambushed, nowhere to go off of that road. And we rolled in, and they're like, we're taking fire from multiple possession, multiple POOs, multiple points of origin that, we don't know exactly where. We're just taking it. And I'm like, this is the first time I roll into an engagement and the Taliban continued to shoot. Usually we roll in with the Apaches and they're like, oh, not today, but this time they're like still shooting. And I'm like, okay, good. We're going to be able to develop this situation. We'll be able to figure out. And now I realize it's really hard. It's really hard to figure out where these dudes are at. Like super hard based off.
Was a day? You may have said day or night.
It was daytime. So you couldn't muzzle flashes. You can in the day, it's just a lot harder, right? And I'd never seen them, so I didn't know what I was looking for. And so we're looking and we're trying to find it. We're trying to talk to the ground guys and say, can you give us a closer bearing on where we should be looking? And finally, my co-pilot, my aircraft commander, he gets real aggressive. I mean, he comes down to 10, 20 feet right over where we think these guys are at, and he's slowing us down. We're pretty juicy target at this point, and he's just like daring them to do something. And
so he's trying to draw fire so you can establish a position. Is really what? And no, that's awesome. You guys, I've seen you guys do that. It's fucking awesome. I want people out there to know that's what you're trying to do, that's brave as shit, dude. That is amazing.
And I'm ignorant, and I don't know what I'm like. Okay, he knows. I'm just up here looking at the tactical acquisition display and all that kind of stuff, trying to find stuff. And in my head, I'm like, we are moving pretty slow. I could hit us, And just as we kind of were sliding, and we slid off of the ledge to where we were over the canyon. So we went from like 20 feet to like 300 feet, right? As far as our altitude. And right then, we just get rocked, like boom, the whole thing, the innards, everything, and the helicopter gets launched forward, and we are falling. And I'm down into that canyon, and I can see the rock we're going to crash on. I could see it, and it's so weird how your brain works. I'm like, okay, we're going to crash there. I'm already, tightening down my thing. I'm like, and once we hit, I got to grab my radio, my gun. I got to, it's all going through your head. I got to pull Doug out of the back seat. Well, the realistic is I'm going to be smashed in the front seat, and nobody's getting me out. That's the realistic thing. But you're an optimist when you're about to die. So, then all of a sudden we fly out of it. He pulls out and we start flying, and I'm like, what the heck? Now I know, and what happened is RPG blew up underneath us. It caused real bad air. The helicopter couldn't fly in that air. It was turbulent and vortices, so we fell through that air. Doug, being the champion he was, saw that the engines and everything was still working, continued to fly instead of freak out and die, and flew us out of the thing. Right?
Wow.
So grateful he was there, because I don't know what I would have done as a 300-hour guy. I probably thought we were done. I probably would have entered an auto rotation. I don't know what I would have done. But then we roll back in, and I actually start to see muzzle flashes. I actually start to be like, oh, that's what that is. It's just real quick, just a little flicker, and I realize what I'm seeing. More out of my peripheral vision than focused on even. And so I talked to the ground guys. I'm like, hey, verify there's nobody at this. Nope, we don't have any friendlies over there. So then Doug's like, shoot it. So I start shooting with the 30 in the middle. And it's the first time I pulled the trigger where when I squeeze the trigger, there's death on the other end. Right?
Somebody's dead. Yeah, you're killing people. I know it's hard. I know it. You can say that on this show. If you can't say, I get it. But that's what you're doing. You're killing.
Yeah, it's just a different feeling. It's a different feeling, and I don't know if that impacted me right then. I don't think it did. At that moment, I was just shooting, and I was shooting. It was impactful later, but not right then. And muzzle flash. Once I started shooting muzzle flashes, they started coming everywhere. They were like, oh no, you know where we're at. So they all started shooting, right? Boom, 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 boom. So we kept shooting, and that kind of died down a little bit. And we're still looking around. They're still taking some pot shots over at the convoy. So we're still flying around. And what's that saying where, the definition of insanity is when you do the exact same thing.
Yeah, Albert Einstein.
We were in the exact same spot doing the exact same thing, and we got rocked again, right? This time's I didn't know if it was pieces of us or rock was hitting the canopy. We're falling. This time we went like it wasn't just forward and down. It was like this angled bank down. But I had 10-minute-old wisdom, right? So I rolled in and looked in, and I was like, all right, we got engines. Let's fly out of this thing, right? And so he did. He flew out, and then I'm like, Doug, that guy's on the other side of the valley. There's no way he's hitting us right there every time from this side. There's a dude on the other side, and luckily the ground guys figured that same thing out. It was quiet enough. They kind of honed in on where they shot. They saw the RPG mustache, is what I call it, in that little cloud.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yep.
And they pointed us in the direction, and then we obliterated that spot, and then we finished up, and they ended up getting freedom of maneuver again, and we left and broke station. And when I got out of the helicopter that time, that's when it hit. When I put my feet on the ground, and I was like, holy crap, this is real. Like, those targets shoot back with the intent to take us down, right? That's what they're doing, right? And I don't know how many of those abadabas I sent to their place today, right? I don't know how many, but it's a lot, and I think I say in the book, I was like, maybe by by answering with a freaking Thor-like punch, that the guys that made it can go home and talk to their families about maybe we should just make love, right? Instead of like, maybe we should just do other things like raise goats, and maybe we should stop this because it's such a one-sided battle at some point. I mean, even though it is a one-sided, they did almost take us out of the air twice.
Yeah,
they did.
Yeah.
We had technological advantage beyond. I mean, a huge technological advantage. They still almost took us out twice. So it was just this huge, impactful moment of, okay, this is real, and now we got to move forward with that new understanding that take this shit serious because they do. They live it, and they've lived it for decades. I mean, centuries. And they this isn't. They don't get mid tours. This is what they do, right? They are committed to their cause, whether that cause makes sense or not, and they're willing to do anything to take us out for that cause.
And they do have the experience. Like you said, you learned that experience in flight school where you had that. Now I learned something from. Well, shit, 10,000 years they've been learning from experience, and that's why they're good. They're good. I always said that. I tell people, yeah, you like the Taliban? You're like, no, I don't like them, but I respect the hell of them. They're fucking good. They're good at what they do. That's what they do. Their experience. They live that. That's their job. Yeah.
So that's so I wrote the book because I did this and I had a lot of these other experiences. And at the end of the day, I feel like I was stronger for it. But I looked at a lot of guys that had the same experiences, and it actually crippled them. Right.
Yeah. That's true.
Some of them even took their own lives. I mean, so I was like, why? Why is that? And one of the principles that we dug down, we did 7 principles of things that I was doing that probably helped me experience post-traumatic stress growth rather than damage. And one of them was exactly what you just said. I never hated the enemy. Hate what they do, hate their cause. I didn't hate those men.
Yeah.
Those men were freaking badass. I mean, they're running around in sandals and freaking
shower shoes. They used to put them damn plastic shower shoes in the winter time. It's nuts. They're fighting literally in Crocs, open-toe Crocs. Yeah.
And they're hanging. I mean, the ratio of us killing them to them killing us is staggering. But they're still there. They're still doing it.
All right, that was Brian Slade, Apache pilot and author, from episode 187. Before we go any further, this episode is sponsored by our great friends at Bubs Naturals. Promo code BATTLELINE for 20% off at bubsnaturals.com. Man, they have the best collagen protein out there. Apple cider vinegar gummies with the mother, which is great for digestive health, gut health. MCT oil powder, which is a great energy boosting product and also great for the essential fats that you should be getting in your diet. And I can't forget also, along with the hydration packets and all that, hydrate or die, Bubs Brew. They have the best coffee out there. Bubs Brew, check it out. Just all great supplements from a great company that gives back to the Glenn Doherty Memorial Foundation. None other than Bubs Naturals. Once again, visit bubsnaturals.com. Use the promo code BATTLELINE for 20% off. This show is also sponsored by our good friends at Fort Scott Munitions. Fort Scott Munitions is a manufacturer of multi-federal patented solid copper and brass CNC-spun ammunition that is designed to tumble upon impact in soft tissue, leaving devastating wound channels for faster bleed out and quicker incapacitation. This ammunition was originally developed to innovate and improve on the standard of military-grade ammunition design. It was found that not only did the TUI ammunition outperform competitors in the self-defense industry, but it quickly became apparent that it would be a top contender for hunters alike. With the ammunition being CNC spun, the tolerances are some of the tightest on the market, ensuring that you receive the same results with each pull of the trigger. Fort Scott Munitions is available throughout privately owned businesses in all 50 states, but you'll get the best deal through us when you go to fsm.com and you use the promo code BATTLELINE for 15% off your order. Only available to listeners of the Battleline podcast. Fort Scott Munitions is a proud supporter of Chris Peranto, Battleline Tactical, and the Battleline podcast. FSM.com, promo code BATTLELINE. All right, next one here is from the most recent of these episodes. Amber Smith, Army Kiowa pilot, from episode 216, and we're going to have Amber back on very soon for her new book coming out, which we're looking forward to. So check it out, Amber Smith from episode 216.
I made pilot in command in Iraq towards the second half of the deployment. Pilot in command means you're in charge of the aircraft. It's like you're the commander of the aircraft. Before that, you're a PI, which is a pilot. And in Afghanistan, I had much more responsibility. I become an air mission commander, which is the commander of a team. So usually 2 aircrafts is how we flew in combat. You're the lead in a trail.
Yeah.
So Afghanistan was just like a much different war for me. It was a lot of like mountain flying, very close proximity to the enemy, just based on how we flew, like so close in the mountains. I'll say one thing that stuck out for me was this was fairly new to arriving in country. We had just gotten in Jalalabad, and we did right seat, left seat, right seat rides in the Korangal. You've probably heard of the Korangal up the Pesh River Valley.
Yep.
And so there was a troops in contact, and we had just done our like entire mission block. So it was daytime transitioning into nighttime. We were in the FARP, unloading our rockets, unloading our 50 cal, and getting gas, and we get this call for troops in contact, and we kind of talk to each other, and we're like, and this was up the Pesh, so it was probably like a good 15 to 20 minute flight, and we hadn't really done much since we had gotten there. Like I said, this was very early on, and we were like, another team was about to come on call, and we're like, nope, we're already in the flight. We got this, and so we told the FARP guys, we're like, load us back up. They load us up, and you do this, the let's go now. And we picked up, and we max collective, max torque, and it was dark by then, so we were sort of tired. You get tired from flying a helicopter for so many hours. The adrenaline kicks in, and I had a brand new left seater, which I feel for, because I've been in that position as a brand new pilot and right in combat, and you have the other pilot being flying the helicopter, but also putting in the nav grid and telling him to write everything down that we're getting, they're firing artillery right now, and get the hold line, make sure we know where it is on the map, where we're not supposed to fly in. And then you hear a medevac coming in, and then you hear the ground guys who are kind of frantic because they have a bunch of wounded and KIA, and they're calling in Apaches that are in a different area of the airspace. And so there's so many moving parts and pieces. And so anyway, this was what was happening. We were flying up to Asadabad, which is up the Konar River Valley, and then you take a left into the Pesh River Valley, and it's almost like a canyon is how you would describe it, because the mountains are so high and it's so steep that you're flying through this canyons, and the mountains are above you almost, and which puts you in not kind of a vulnerable position for an aircraft. So the artillery starts firing, and we're holding, and it's just, I don't know how to describe it other than mad chaos. We are listening to 4 radios going off, talking at the exact same time, and you're kind of responsible for listening to certain ones. And then you have medevacs coming in, and finally you get cleared into the fight, and you're getting a grid from a ground guy, and they're shining IR lasers on the target. And we come in, and we just set up our pattern, and we just lob rockets into the side of the mountain, which was the opening to the Korangal River Valley. They actually closed the Korangal to aircraft soon after we got there, because on a right seat, left seat ride, they were actually firing RPGs at the aircraft. It wasn't a flight that I was on, but they were just okay, we don't want, an aircraft going down like right when we get here. And so, yeah, ended up, it was, it's a story that's in my book. There was, I do believe it was like 3 or 4 enemy KIA. A medevac came in, picked up some of the wounded US forces. And then another Kiowa team came on station. We were like so low on fuel. Like our, when you get low on fuel, you get this bong that goes off in the helicopter. And it's just like bong, 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 bong. But we made sure that, we were able to make it back and get fuel. But
did you end up going when you got there? Did you end up refueling and heading back, or do you just expend? And with the Kiowa, do you just expend all your rounds and then get out of there? Just like when we used to call little birds on station, they would dump everything, and then we'd have another group come in and fly in. Is the Kiowa the same thing, where just because of their size, and Apache can kind of hang on station a little bit, the Cobras can and maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. They carry more armaments. They're a little bit bigger aircraft.
We are limited on. We usually carried about 300 rounds of 50 cal. This is just standard. If we knew we were going to go do something different, then we would change our weapons load.
Okay.
But usually about 350 rounds of 50 cal, which doesn't go. You don't lose it as fast as you do with like a minigun.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Yes. Shoot slower. Yes. And then we also would carry like 4 rockets usually, 4 to 6 rockets. But we also like loaded up because we knew we were going in, which you then have to sacrifice fuel for. So
sure.
If you take more ammo, you got to cut down on the fuel that you take on, which then changes your on station time. So one of the many struggles that the Army was faced with when trying to figure out what to do after the Kiowa, because the aircraft needed to be replaced, but it was just such a specific and effective mission for a war like Iraq and Afghanistan that the Kiowa did its job very, very well in those 2 theaters of operation. But to answer your question, we were relieved. We were also limited. We had been flying for a while. And so when we were in the FARC, when we got the troops in contact call, we, took off and went, but we knew we'd have to switch out because of fuel and ammo.
That was Amber Smith from episode 216, another recent one here. This is Jack Stewart, FA-18 pilot and author. We're going to have Jack also on very soon because he has yet another book coming out in his series that we're looking forward to. But another combat story from pilot Jack Stewart.
I did join in peacetime, and it was it was after Desert Storm. Which I was in junior high, I think, when Desert Storm happened. So we were in the Middle East, but it was all, Southern Watch, and it was all the peacetime operations. So that's what I kind of expected I was going into. I went through the Naval Academy, graduated in 1999, started flight training, ended up, training in the Hornet. And on my first day, my first F-18 simulator was 9/11. And I remember walking into the simulator building, having heard on the radio about this plane crashing into the World Trade Center, thinking, man, weather must be terrible up there. I still have a hard time believing a plane would crash into the building. And I walked into the sim building and I saw the second plane hit. And I knew at that moment that we were going to war, and, we were at war for the rest of my career. And so it definitely put things into perspective, because you've trained your entire career up until that point for this moment. And so I knew every training mission I did from that moment on had meaning. When I trained in close air support, I knew that I was going to one day be flying over Afghanistan. I didn't know it was going to be Iraq, but I knew I was going to be doing something to support the guys on the ground that were kind of, hitting back against the enemy. I knew that was going to happen. So it definitely put things in perspective for me. As far as like my combat deployments go, I'm sure everyone kind of feels the same. The first one is definitely like, eye-opening experience, and then it becomes more routine. I hate to say it, but it does. And then I got the unique experience too of having combat, from 30,000 feet and then getting to see it on the ground. And that was also another eye-opening experience for me. Made me really want to go back to the boat and kind of live, on an aircraft carrier again instead of a tent. But yeah, it was just a really, really unique experience, but I'm super proud that I was able to do.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people can't say that. So I'm very proud.
Do you have any good combat related stories that you're comfortable telling? Because I'm sure with all the deployments you have, there's got to be some awesome stuff you've seen.
And they vary from like the terrifying to the funny to, but for me, the one story that always sticks out in my mind is my very first combat mission, flying into Iraq. So after training in the F-18, I joined VF 87, and I was the first new guy that they had since 9/11, and so they were deployed on 9/11 on the Enterprise, and they were actually on their way home, and the boat turned around. So they were the first guys to drop bombs in Afghanistan. So I was the first new guy to join the squadron. So these are all very seasoned combat experience, guys that I'm flying with. And now we go on deployment on the Roosevelt, and this is during the shock and awe part of Iraqi freedom. So we're just starting, and we were in the Mediterranean, and we were flying through Turkey to get into Iraq from the north. So we were supporting all special operations forces, other governmental agencies that were on the ground doing stuff. We were the only support they had. So we were doing closer support for them. And I remember flying into Iraq on my first mission and looking down and seeing AAA, like anti-aircraft artillery, shooting up at us. And so my first initial thought is, holy crap, they're shooting at me. And that's like a scary thing because they can actually hit me and then I can crash and, die and all the bad stuff. Right. But it was immediately replaced with anger. Like, how dare you shoot at me? And I just remember that switch that was just flipped from being
the switch is on, as you say.
The switch is on, right? Yeah, you go from being scared to just falling back on your training and doing everything that they've taught you from day one. And from that moment on, I wouldn't say I was like completely at peace, but I was definitely more comfortable. I felt confident that I could do the job.
All right, and one last one for this episode, guys. We'll be back next week with full video and all that jazz from SHOT Show, actually. I should mention, we'll be recording at SHOT Show, and I'm looking forward to that with Phil Otto, with Sean Kirk, and Dale Sizemore, and I'll give you the full recap and all that of SHOT Show following that, actually, in the following episode. But you'll get a little peek behind the curtain for all of you who won't be there in Vegas. But ending this episode is friend of the show, Ashlee Olbricht, which I should mention. Ashlee Leppert is the name when you buy her book prior to her marriage. So check it out. Air Medal recipient. She talks about rescuing people during Hurricane Harvey, rescuing babies, and being honored at the White House. This is from episode 196. Ashlee Olbricht. And we'll be back once again next week on Tuesday for another new episode of Battle Line Podcast. Thanks.
Well, okay, let me take you back to August, I believe it was 27th, 2017. This is kind of a cool story, precursor to the actual mission of with the babies, but one of my rescue swimmers that I happen to have been stationed in Detroit with, he had been stationed in Corpus Christi at the time of Hurricane Harvey, and this was the second day. So everybody was kind of swarming in from all units, just sending, all hands on deck kind of mission. And my rescue swimmer on this second day of mission happened to be rescue swimmer Troy Ramsdell that I had trained up in Detroit. So it was super cool to be like, we pounded fists real quick and I was like, bro, you're my rescue swimmer. And he's like, you're my flight mechanic. So it was a really cool moment, doing a quick pre-flight on the helicopter and kind of prepping for like, man, shit's about to go down kind of thing. So anyways, we get a call, and I still to this day don't know exactly where the location was, but it was either a children's recovery facility or it was something where there was just a mass amount of children with different, issues that needed to be out. So we fly to this area. So, I mean, and it's just crazy because we're in the smallest helicopter the Coast Guard has. It is a short range recovery MH-65 Dolphin. So like you blow on it and it's like, woo, you know, like it does not handle turbulence and wind well, but the pilots are super amazing at what they do. And they kept a steady course. But so we get this call to go out. We're on this mission. We got the coordinates. They're like, all right, be prepared. A lot of people out there. But backtracking, I did not know this. We did not know this at the time that there was a bunch of children there. They just said, hey, here's the coordinates, roll out. People are in trouble. So we get there and I con the pilots into position, which means that I'm literally at this point hanging out of the helicopter. I'm, you know, keeping the pilots in position. I'm lowering my rescue swimmer down on the hook. And I mean, there's a huge tree behind us. There's power lines in front of us. So I mean, my head's on a swivel, constantly keeping the pilots in check and making sure we don't hit anything. And I lower the swimmer down. He's in the water and I see, you know, slowly we're getting people in. We fill the cabin up, we drop them off at the convention center. But the second sortie out, I lower my swimmer down and I notice that he puts a woman into the basket. And I see just bundles of what I thought at the time to be like clothes. And I'm thinking to myself, Troy, bro, like, stop putting this lady's clothes in the basket. Like, we need to save room for humans, man. Like, what are you doing? But as you know, you just trust your team. I'm like, he knows what he's doing down there. I'm just going to trust him. So this is the last hoist. There's a woman in what I think to be 5 bundles of clothing, and I'm hoisting her up. I slide her into the cabin with the basket. I disconnect, lower it down just enough time to get my rescue swimmer before it's like bingo and we got to go. We're out of fuel. So as I finally get him in the cabin, and mind you, there's 5 to 6 other people and their babies already in there. So we're crammed tight. And I have my rescue swimmer and I'm holding on to him and we're heading over to the landing zone. And I happen to look back and she's undoing the mother in the basket is undoing these bundles. And I see these little baby eyes staring up at me. And I'm like, holy crap. And then she undoes the second bundle and there's another baby and then another and another. And soon there's 4 little sets of baby eyes staring up at me. And I'm just like, I get chills thinking about it now because, you know, it's such a profound moment recognizing like what you're doing because you're so numb to it. You're compartmentalizing the mission and the emotional aspect of it. But then in that moment, I'm seeing these 4 little babies looking up at me and I'm like, wow, like we're out here doing the Lord's work, man. Like we're like saving these people from potentially dying. Like it just hit me like a ton of bricks. And it was a moment that I will never forget, looking into those babies' eyes and just remembering like the mission and the danger of what was happening around us.
Yeah. How were you able to hold it together? I just would look away. And not because it's because I don't, hey, no, don't cry. Look away now. I'm not, because I got to stay you got to stay focused and you can, there's time for crying. I always thought this, there'll be time for crying. There'll be time for high fives down when I'm done. All right. But right now, there are times where you see something like, oh, that's getting to me. All right. Walk away. And some people see that as insensitivity. That was just the way for me to maintain my composure. Is that what you did? Just looked away and found a job to do, found something to do to keep your mind off it? Or did you break down?
That's exactly what I did. Is I looked away. There was actually, I want to say a little boy about 7 years old or so, and I gave him my flight mechanic's seat and he was sitting there by himself, and I'll never forget his little legs were just trembling because he was so cold. And so I took my attention off the babies and all that was happening and the feeding tube with the baby in the back, and I got the survival blanket out and I wrapped it on his legs and I was like, I gave you the best seat in the house. You know, in that moment, it was just like a way for me to like make this little boy's day because he had just left a horrific situation and now he's flying in a helicopter, and I tried to make light of the situation. And I just couldn't look at those little babies, especially since like we thought one was not alive at first. And that's a whole nother story. But I gave my rescue swimmer that kind of task to handle. And I put my focus on trying to make this little boy's helicopter ride the best ride of his life.
That's so cool. I was gonna.
The joking. I tell people this laughter. movies and the bravado. That's why I do love our movie. They got the jokes that actually happen under duress. All that jackassery, all the comments, all the sayings from bad movies, where there's Team America or Tropic Thunder. Those things happen, and you're like, hey, I got the best seat in the house. Laughter is what gets you through that stressful moments, and that's where a lot of movies that get out there, the bravado's there, but they miss all that funny jackassery that goes on. And you just proved it again. Like, what did you do under all that stress? I made a fucking joke. Exactly. That's exactly what happened. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but
no, and that's cool. I mean, because you've said this before on the show, and I do think, yeah, it's reflected when we have stories like this. What I was going to say is, you said earlier in the interview, and you say it in the book too. I mean, you don't do it for the accolades or the awards. That's not why you do this. But I have to wonder, what was it like when you got the call? We're going to have you as the guest at the State of the Union address. You're going to be sitting next to the First Lady, Melania Trump. I mean, what was the phone call like? I mean, was it a shock to you? And what was it like, being in, because I've been in the room. I mean, it's like a small room. It's not as big as it looks on TV, and being the center of attention for this like monumental event.
I don't even know where to begin, because it was wild. Like, I still feel like it was a dream. And on the hangar deck, we joke all the time. Like, that's a part of, like you said, is decompression and being able to lighten the mood, because we do some heavy missions and some heavy stuff. But when I got the call, I had my phone on silent, and I was doing heavy maintenance on the aircraft, and I had my phone on silent, but it was on vibrate, and it kept vibrating. So I would look at it, and it would be like a blocked call. So I would send it to voicemail and be like, man, who's calling me? They know it's a work day. And then I would put the phone back in my pocket. And then again, they would call, block number. I'm like, psh. So like after the third or fourth time, I don't remember, I finally answered, and I was like, hello? Like, I was so rude, because I thought it was like a telemarketer, and it was like this sweet lady, and she was like, hey, this is so-and-so calling from the White House on behalf of President Trump and the First Lady. And I was like, I instantly looked around the hangar deck. I'm like, who's playing a joke on me in here? Like, that never happens. But like, it was legit, bro. And I was like, cool. So I obviously got the invitation, had no clue, like zero idea, like the extent of what it was. I thought like, oh, cool, I'll sit in the back row, peanut gallery, like maybe I'll get a picture with like a senator or something cool. But like sitting in that front row, that's when I realized, I was like, I looked over to Karen Pence, the vice president, the second lady at the time. And I was like, I'm getting a little nervous. Like, is he going to talk about me in his speech? Like, what do I do? And thank God I asked that question, because she's like, the proper protocol is that you stay seated for the standing ovation. Like, everybody's supposed to stand and clap at you. Like, thank God, because I would have just stood up and been like, oh, like, what do I do? So like, and I didn't realize that I was going to be spoken about, let alone in the first 5 minutes. And on top of that, have 2 standing ovations.
Ashlee was aboard one of the first helicopters on the scene in Houston during the Hurricane Harvey. Through 18 hours of wind and rain, Ashlee braved live power lines and deep water to help save more than 40 lives. Ashlee, we all thank you. Thank you very much.
Like, it's so mind-blowing, and the entire time I just kept saying to myself, like, thank you, God, because I knew that I was going to utilize that blessing as a platform to share my story and pique the interest of people, so I could talk about my faith and my journey.
That's all for this episode of Battle Line Podcast. But we're always posting new content on social media. Follow us on Instagram at Battleline Podcast and on Twitter at Battleline Pod. That's an order. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any new episodes up every Tuesday. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or your podcast platform of choice. Believe in yourself. Face all challenges head on. And as always, never quit.